Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to UFO, UAP, NHI, an alien abductee, experiencer, survivor, and whistleblower, writer and freelance comic book artist, former history teacher, loving partner to former podcast guest and survivor, Kaity, and an absolute warrior on the battlefield, Schultz. Aaron's bizarre experiences began in early childhood in the town of Chesterfield, Missouri, where he started life with a largely normal childhood and family life. The first experiences Aaron remembers having with beings not of this world began around the age of 5 or 6 during his young and formative years, and they would continue to happen randomly and periodically until about the age of 10. Some of Aaron's memories are crystal clear, and others are fractured and fragmented, very similar to most of the guests you see on the show who have dealt with extreme trauma and dissociation. Aaron's ability to lucid dream as a child would provide much needed validation to the realness of his abduction experiences. He would be taken by what he would describe as typical gray alien beings during the night and would find that his usual ability to control his dream environment when he slept would be gone. He even recalls a moment during one of his experiences where one of the gray aliens would say to him telepathically as he was trying to lucid dream, "That won't work here. You are not dreaming." Some of Aaron's more vivid experiences would begin with him laying in bed as a child, staring out of the bedroom window at night, when suddenly a dark, disc-shaped object with green lights spinning around the edges would fly over the next door neighbor's house, then to the backyard of Aaron's home. Seconds after Aaron would notice what was happening, he would hear footsteps in the hallway directly outside his room. After hearing the footsteps, the non-human beings would enter his room. He would initially be filled with an abject feeling of terror, and then suddenly the terror would be washed away with a sense of calm and what would appear to be a thought projection that the beings would seem to beam into his mind and body telepathically. After that, young Aaron would find himself walking out of his bedroom, down the hall, into the living room, and then out into the backyard where a large ship would be waiting for him. And what Aaron is here today to disclose what happened next will send chills down your spine and leave your jaw on the floor. Aaron is so brave for speaking out on this topic. Believe it or not, I have spoken to so many SRA and MK Ultra survivors in confidence who have alleged their own UFO, UAP, and or NHI experiences that they have been too afraid to talk about for the fear of the public not believing or discrediting them. The fact is that we cannot put this puzzle together without adding the UFO, UAP, and NHI piece to it. It's heroes like Aaron on the front lines who are going to help normalize this conversation in order that others can come forward also and share their experience without hesitation. And so we can have a down-to-earth and grounded way of speaking on these topics that often get sensationalized and discredited, much like what happens with SRA and MK Ultra. We know advanced technologies exist, and we also know that non-human intelligence and beings exist all around us, both in the physical and spiritual realms. There is no reason we should be ignoring the conversation around what these entities and technologies are so we can get to the bottom of it. What Aaron's testimony will demonstrate is a possibility as to why these beings are here, and it's far more terrifying and sinister than you can imagine. And as you'll see, lines right up with what we see happening in the world today. So I ask you all to give this brave warrior your full attention as he courageously whistleblows the events he experienced, survived, and that we now have the honor of listening to that he's kept secret for decades until now. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the podcast as a guest or share any information privately with me, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. You can also use this email if you'd like to be a part of my new book series featuring written survivor testimonies, and you can find the video with all the details on how to submit your testimony on any of my podcast channels. And lastly, I'd love your support on Substack, where I've taken up investigative journalism as an outlet for me personally to share about my podcast, guests, and advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me there at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All my links are in the show notes, and I'd love your support across all platforms. Thank you all for caring so deeply about survivors and whistleblowers, and for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor and whistleblower disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, survivor, overcomer, experiencer, whistleblower, educator, independent researcher and reporter, content creator, artist, hero, voice for the voiceless, anti-child abuse and survivor advocate, and someone I'm honored to call my friend, the one, the only, Aaron Schultz. Aaron, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm actually really stoked about this. I know that this is a hard topic to talk about, but I don't think it's talked about enough. I've heard a lot of people behind the scenes talking about it who aren't publicly discussing it. And unfortunately, it's a topic even I know very little about because it's just not talked about a lot, and so I think that this conversation can serve to hopefully educate people who are also like me and they don't get to hear these stories very often. Bring all these different communities together. I consider the UFO, UAP, NHI community. I mean, you guys have gone through horrors beyond comprehension, just like a lot of SRA, MK Ultra, human trafficking survivors, and there's no reason these conversations shouldn't intermingle. And I'm also hoping that your testimony will encourage other people on the other side to say, you know what? Aaron's out here talking about this. He's brave. He's fine. I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of opposition, and we'll talk about some of that later. But, at the end of the day, it's so much bigger than all of us. And I really appreciate your courage to, speak on these hard topics. So I thought what we do is go back in time. Your story is also interesting because it's not part of a generational family, at least that you know of. This is an incident that, involved you specifically. So I'd love to go back and talk about what your childhood was like before these incidents started happening, these experiences, a little bit about your family and just about you, before all this happened to you, what were you like in your childhood?
I had a pretty normal, happy, typical childhood before these experiences started happening. My dad was an accountant. My mom was, at the time, for a while, not working. It was just a pretty normal, happy childhood. Played outside a lot, watched cartoons and all that. It was, nothing really out of the ordinary up until very out of the ordinary things started happening.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really fascinating part about your story because there's really no indication as to, why this happened, and I know that that's a commonality between all abductees. None of them seem to know why they're chosen. There doesn't seem to necessarily always be a pattern. And one of the things that, and maybe there are that you can educate us on later, some things that you found are like anomalies, but I wanted to say, like, one of the things I noticed in a lot of the abductee stories that I have watched from other experiencers, because I feel like unless you sort of know the community, you don't really know who to trust, and who you should be looking to get information. So unfortunately, a lot of people watch TV, they watch Netflix, they watch, these documentaries. And it seems like a lot of the times the people chosen to represent this topic are these, and no offense against, I'm not making fun of people, but they seem to pick people that sort of seem crazy, people that are sort of isolated and their appearance looks, they might be missing teeth or like not well off. And you can tell by, how they talk that there's something maybe wrong with them. Some of them seem like they're on drugs, and that isn't everybody, but unfortunately, I think that this topic gets kind of like misunderstood and mocked in society too. So I think, learning firsthand what these experiences were, from somebody who has your background too, history teacher, you are a very grounded, eloquent person. You're not somebody that anybody, if they didn't know you, nobody would suspect that you went through this, or that there was anything wrong in your life. So I think you're such an awesome person to represent this topic. So let's talk about what was going on in your life and what age were you around the time that your first experience happened?
Well, my first experience happened when I was around 5 or 6 years old, and it was there. Like you said, I believe in the intro, some of these memories are really clear, others are more fragmented, and my earliest memories of just having experienced these experiences are more fragmented. Um, I remember suddenly finding myself in a very weird classroom type setting, or at least what I perceived at the time, 5 or 6 years old as a classroom. I was sitting at a desk that almost looked like the type of desk you just expect to find at a school, but it was metallic and sort of looked like it was all like machined out of the same piece of metal or whatever. And there were a lot of other kids around me. I wasn't alone in the classroom. It was like just like you would find in any other classroom. It was like, like rows of desks, and I was sitting somewhere in the middle. I wasn't at the front of the front of the room or the back of the room. I was just right smack dab in the middle. The room was dimly lit, like with like red lighting. Like at the front of the room, there seemed to be this just red light, like shining on the walls that didn't seem to be coming from anywhere. Like there was no like red lamp or something, but like it was just red light. And towards the back of the room, the light faded and it was pretty dark, but um there were other kids around me, and at the front of the classroom was a being who, in like UFO lore, uh, has been described as a like tall gray. He was, he looked like a giant to me at the time. 5, 6 years old. He had to have been at least 6 feet tall, uh, gray skin, long arms. He was very thin, but not quite frail looking. I believe I sent you a picture that I illustrated of it. Yeah, there he is right there. And he had, black eyes, a nose that really wasn't much more than just two holes in his head, and a mouth that was pretty much just like just a slit that was right there. Wearing a tight fitting red suit with gold trim. I don't, I wish I could remember more of what he was talking about. I can't really, but he was, his presence felt very serious and very imposing. And while I don't remember at the moment anyway what he was saying, I remember feeling very compelled to pay attention and to listen and to absorb, which is ironic because, the memories are definitely not like complete in my head anymore. Um, the And it's, this is a memory I've had some trouble with, and I waited a while before I shared this because I don't remember. I have no idea where I was. This classroom could have been underground. It could have been on a craft. I have no idea where I was. I just suddenly found myself in this classroom with a being looking like that, at the head of the room. And at first, I lucid dreamed a lot as a kid. You mentioned that, I think. And so I tried to, like, this is a dream. I'm going to get out of here. But I tried, to just think myself into a different situation, but nothing moved around me. And then, like, under my desk, I pinched myself and it hurt, which, was another little dream test I would do as a kid. And then in my head, like you mentioned, I heard, that won't work here. You're not dreaming. And then I just was like, all right. And I I was just, it was, ugh, it's crazy. This is actually the first time, this part of the story, I haven't shared it publicly yet. This is actually the first time I've even talked about it out loud. So it was that was the earliest experience with, like, being somewhere I wasn't supposed to be with a being who did not appear to be human. So that was my earliest experience.
Do you remember approximately like how many kids were in that class?
Thinking about it, it probably was somewhere between 25 and 30 other kids.
Oh my gosh.
It
Wow.
was like a full, like, classroom full of kids.
Did everybody else seem reserved like you that you can remember?
Everybody else seemed pretty glazed over. Yeah, which was one of the things initially when I'm like, okay, all these kids are just sitting here like, "Ugh, I'm dreaming. I've got to be dreaming. Ooh, what is that thing? Things like that aren't real. I've got to be dreaming." But nope, wasn't dreaming.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I know, like you said, that's your first time sharing it publicly, and just know that like we embrace you, believe you, and appreciate you sharing. That's a puzzle piece for people. You're not going to be the only one who has had something really out of this world literally happen to them like that. These all these different things validate people. So I really appreciate you sharing. And I wanted to ask, before we move on, because I know that we have a bunch more experiences, and I want to talk about, maybe how this affected you and stuff like that, or what you remember going through as a kid emotionally and things like that. But for people that are kind of new to this, like how I'm a little bit newer, just so people sort of understand terminology, would you be able to break down the difference between UFO, UAP, and NHI for people who might not be familiar with those terms?
Yeah, definitely. So UFO is like the classic term used to describe, a flying saucer, an alien craft. It stands for unidentified flying object. UAP is a newer term, which stands for unidentified anomalous phenomena, and it's a newer term that was coined basically as a way to sort of move away from the stigmatization attached to UFO, because you hear, oh, I saw UFO, and you picture, those toothless sort of people that you were talking about earlier. So the term UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, was created to move away from the stigmatization that surrounds the term UFO, but also to because these objects aren't always flying. Sometimes they're underwater also. They so it was I think it was somebody in the government who coined the term. I don't want to say who and be lambasted for saying the wrong name, but it was somebody in the government decided at some point to start calling it UAP because it more accurately described the the types of craft that people are seeing. And then NHI it stands for non-human intelligence, and it is a term that really seems to catch on more late, like it seems to be like a newer term that seems to have caught on lately that is used in place of extraterrestrial or alien, be, and is used by a lot of people within the government who are insiders in these, who know about all this UFO, UAP stuff because um, are they extraterrestrial? Are they from another planet? Are they from underground the Earth? Are they interdimensional? No one is really sure. No one can really say. So, designating them as non-human intelligence instead of an alien or an extraterrestrial, uh, sort of like changing UFO to UAP, it covers more bases.
Gotcha, that makes sense. It seems too, from like the little bit that I've seen, that UFO gets used a lot, like how you said, sort of the sensationalized version of it, but also really specifically to things from another planet. And it seems like people tend to use UAP also as like things that originated on the planet, like on our planet, like advanced technology that our government owns. It seems like stuff like that gets kind of grouped more into the UAP, the stuff that's more localized on our planet. And then UFO is like usually always associated with things that come onto our planet from somewhere else. Is that right? Do you seem to see that too, or not so much?
Yeah, especially nowadays, I hear the term UFO used mainly a lot of the times, like, certain journalists who are out there who are publishing stories to try to make this topic sound crazy. They'll use a lot of coded language like, abducted by aliens, taken in a UFO. Like, I've noticed more often than not when like UFO is used, it's usually being used because whoever is using that term is trying to make whatever story they're talking about seem crazy or sensationalized and whatnot.
I completely agree. And so I think it's good that the language is kind of evolving around it because it gives like a more sophisticated understanding. And then like you said, if it's somebody from the government that's, sort of championing these terms, also these newer terms, then it kind of has a more, I guess, professional looking stigma behind it and something that's a little bit more grounded versus the sensationalized fictional versions that are portrayed a lot publicly. So it's really fascinating, for people who are listening that might be new to this, it's kind of interesting how we're starting to evolve the conversation in a more sophisticated way and like creating more specific terms, which is good. The non-human intelligence too, I think that's a good one to add to it versus just alien, because again, people associate that with like, you drive through Las Vegas and you just see, the Area 51 stuff just, it's blocked and it's really sad because there's a lot of people who have had really horrible experiences, and it seems like people just like to make fun of it and write it off. So after this first experience happened, do you remember what time of day it was that this happened to you? Was that at night also?
I have no idea. That's one of the things that makes that experience frustrating and what gave me pause from sharing those memories for a while is because I don't remember what was going on surrounding the experience itself, like I do with the some of my other experiences where I remember looking out of the window and seeing craft, and then heard footsteps in my hallway, and then they came into the room, and then I was led outside. Like the red room experiences are much more fragmented, and and it's met and the red room, this is a room that I was in more than once, but I don't really remember what was talked about. I just remember I was there. I was in the red room. I remember the first time, I thought I must have been dreaming, and then I was, seemingly telepathically corrected. uh and then I remember other times, thinking like, oh geez, I'm back here again. I remember trying to think about, like, how did I get here? Where was I? Where just was I? And I wasn't able to recall. And these experiences, for whatever reason, more than the other ones, I always just had the weirdest feeling like I'm not supposed to talk about them. Now, I don't know where that feeling comes from. I don't remember, like, no one specifically, from what I'm able to recall presently, told me not to talk about them. But, throughout my life, when I would think about these things, there was just that overwhelming, almost burned into my mind sense like, I'm not supposed to talk about that. I'm not supposed to talk about that. But it there were other kids in that room with me, and so like I feel compelled to talk about it because I can't be the only one who remembers. So
100%. And like I said in the intro, like that is one of the most, to me, that validates your story a lot, that you don't have full memories, because that's another commonality among people who have gone through trauma is you do, like you're either dissociated or you're so young, that like the understanding of it can only go so far. And then these memories come in pieces sometimes. Sometimes you're given a chunk of it and either you'll get the full memory eventually or you don't. But I do think it's important that, a lot of people have began sharing their fragmented memories, because even just the little pieces that you can remember can sometimes be a big puzzle piece for somebody, and of course we all hope that you get a full memory of this and like you get more clarity on it, but in the meantime, like that's a really important piece, even if it's just, something maybe not complete, or if you think that there's a lot more that you're missing, that's still a really, really, it's a shocking thing to hear that there's children and almost, being educated by that terrifying looking creature, that you showed in that drawing. I can't even imagine. And you're 5, 6 years old at this time, like it's scary for me as an adult to look at that and trying to like take in experiencing that as a child. I can't even consider it. So I wanted to ask you, do you remember after that, did that change? Like, do you remember that impacting you at all? Did you just kind of like brush it off? Did you attempt to tell anybody? Like, what did you do after that happened? Do you remember?
I I remember I didn't tell anybody, mainly because I just had that weird feeling like I'm not supposed to talk about this. I'm not supposed to talk about this. But also I just really didn't think anyone would believe me. So I had no idea what to do with the experience. It kind of just held it all in and didn't even really, I didn't know what to do with it as a kid. Honestly, I still don't even really know what to do with it other than spread the word and talk about it.
I was gonna say, what do we do with it even today? But
Mhm.
yes, that's exactly what we have to do, is talk about it and bring a conversation around it. And so that happened, and it sounds like you had more than one instance of this happening. What did that progression sort of look like, as far as how spaced out were some of these events that you can remember, and what was the next one that you experienced that you wanted to share?
Well, the Red Room stuff, I don't I don't know exactly how many times I was in that room, wherever it was. I don't know. It happened at least a handful of times, and it seemed to stop after a while. Um, I think I must have been 6. I must have been 6 years old, because it was I think it was the summer in between kindergarten and first grade, like that sort of. It's so long ago, it's hard for me to exactly tell when it comes to these red room memories, because they're so separate from everything else in my head. But so I was around 6 when it started, and then it stopped pretty abruptly after what had to have been a handful of times. And I didn't, it's not that I forgot about it. It's just I I didn't know what to do with it. And when it stopped happening, I was just so glad that it stopped happening that, it's just, I just sort of, I was so young, I guess I just moved on with with my life.
Like
But
you
then,
compartmentalized it almost like what, a lot of survivors do, just kind of push it back and go on.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it it the fragmentary nature, the not being able to connect it exactly when it happened, that started real quick. As it I remember what I remember is after it stopped, almost immediately starting to like, wait a minute, when did that happen? When was that? I know it happened a little bit ago, but when was it? Like I have no way of knowing whether or not those memories were purposefully suppressed in any way, but it kind of seems like it, at least to a certain extent, they were, just because certain aspects of that experience just vanished and left me with what I have now. And then when I was about 8 years old is when the other experiences started to happen. Um, that and other than the fact that they both involve gray aliens, I don't know the tall gray from the red room and the beings who took me in when I was through the ages of 8 to 10. I have no idea if they're even connected. I assume they must be because I mean I don't know, but I have no way of knowing if the tall guy was from a different group of people or if they were somehow connected, if the red room was some sort of prep for what was to happen. I have no idea. It would just be speculation on my part, but I have no idea. But when I was 8 is where the experiences I touched on a little bit, and that you talked a little bit about your intro when I was taken onto a craft. And those memories are much clearer for whatever reason. When I was, I was laying in bed one night and I was looking out my window and I saw a craft hover over my neighbor's roof and then like hover out of my view on the windowsill in the direction like over my house and towards the backyard. And as soon as like it maybe like a like finger snaps length of time, as soon as it flew over the house out of my view, I heard footsteps coming from the hallway outside of my room. And I when you're a kid, you know what your parents' footsteps sound like. You know what your siblings' footsteps sounded like. I knew it wasn't my parents. I knew it wasn't my brother. And then I was just sort of like just laying there frozen. And then this group of little guys, like around the same height as me, 4 feet tall, couldn't have been too much taller than that. Um, Unlike the Red Room Gray, who was very tall and had like little blue iris shaped things in the middle of his eyes, these things were short. Their skin was grayish green, not like pure flat gray like the other guy. Uh, they had on these like jumpsuit looking things that were dark gray in colored and like came up to like their necks right here, and their feet were covered but their hands were visible. And they came in the room, and at first I was like scared shitless, but very very quickly I felt it was like a feeling of calm that kind of just seemed to come in waves at me inside of my head, which at the time was confusing. But now, as an adult, after I've analyzed and wrote about and thought about these experiences, that must have been that it must have been some form of like telepathic emotion control or something, so that I would be pliable and willing to do what they wanted. And as soon as the calm feeling sort of hit me, I got a very strong knowing that I was supposed to get out of bed and follow them. So that's what I did. I walked towards them, and the feeling, I honestly, I don't even know how I would describe it. It was like, it almost felt like being drugged, is what it almost felt like. The fear was still there underneath everything, but it was the waves of calm were a lot stronger. And so I walked like right into the middle of them, and a couple were behind me, a couple were in front of me. There was maybe one on each side, and we walked down the hallway that was outside of my room, and then the hallway sort of like went to the left and exited out into the living room. And then in the back of the living room, there were these glass patio doors that led to the backyard. And those doors were already open. And I walked into the backyard with them. And as soon as I walked into the backyard, I saw this giant, like, disc-shaped craft. I don't know what else to call it, that was floating there in the sky above my backyard. The green lights that had been like sort of circling around when I saw the thing flying were stationary, and it looked to be metallic, like silvery colored. They so walked out of the house onto the patio, then into the grass of the backyard itself until I was like right underneath the craft itself, like dead center. And right then, as soon, again, about a finger snap's length of time from when I stepped into the center of the craft, is when a very bright light began to emanate from the center of the craft and shine down on me, and got so bright quickly I kind of had to like shield my eyes. And when the light died down, when the light faded away, I saw that I was now alone and no longer in my backyard, but I was in this white room, this like rectangular white room. And I believe, yeah, I made a little illustration to sort of depict what it looked like. It was this it was a rectangular shaped white room. There was a table in the middle of the room, and coming out of the ceiling was what reminded me at the time of like a dentist's light. And I was alone in the room at the time. Like, when I was in my backyard, when the light came down from the center of the ship, they were standing all around me. But when the light faded and suddenly I was in this room, I was by myself. And for like the tiniest little split second, I started feeling afraid again. But then again, almost immediately, it almost felt like a physical thing. The calmness just like whoosh, hit me again. And along with the calmness this time was just the very strong knowing that, okay, I'm supposed to take all my clothes off and go lie down on this table. And and again, in the back of my head, there was a lot going on. Like, I'm like, but I'm not supposed to be doing that. But I'm not supposed to be doing that. But again, the feeling of calmness and the feeling that that was what I was supposed to be doing it was all just very overpowering. So I did it. I took off my clothes. I laid down on the table, and right when I laid down on the table is when it seemed like part of the wall just seemed to open up, like a doorway opening kind of just grew in the wall. And that's when I saw the beings enter the room. There were, again, about maybe 5 or 6 of them. And they walked and sort of just surrounded the table. There were, I think two on one side of the table, and then another two on another side of the table, and I think like one near my feet, and definitely at least one. Thought I heard something there, but I guess I didn't. In the other room of my house, but there was one, at least one behind me that I couldn't really see much of, who was standing like behind where my head was at. And as soon as they were all surround me, the one who was standing behind me, all I could really see of him were his hands, and he took this thing that looked, I don't know how else to describe it, but it looked like a wand or like a baton or something, and it was cylindrical and metal, and it didn't look like anything special. There was no like glowing lights on it or anything. It was just a very simple looking tool. Like, if I saw it laying on the ground, I wouldn't think anything of it. You know what I mean? And he stuck the wand thing in my mouth and scraped it like along this cheek, then along that cheek, and then like across my tongue, and then took it out of my mouth. And that's when the light, which again, in my head, being a kid at the time, it reminded me of a dentist's light, began to, it was almost like a laser light type of light that sort of like emitted from the bulb or whatever it was itself, like sort of like that. And it sort of seemed to like scan like my body back and forth a few times. I have no idea for how long. It seemed like a very long time, but it couldn't have been longer than like say 10 or 15 minutes. And then after the light was done, the light, it went back and forth however many times, and then it shut off. The arm light thing itself kind of just like raised up a little bit, and then I got the mental impression that, okay, now I'm supposed to stand up and put my clothes back on and then follow them. And again, that's what I did. So I got my clothes back on and followed them out of the opening in the wall that they had come through, the doorway or whatever. It was still there. Like, it didn't like disappear after they walked through it. I guess it stayed there. So they walked me out of the white room and into this curved hallway that kind of curved to the left. And then I followed them until the hallway kind of emptied out into a larger room. And this room was the room was featureless and like dark gray, except for a big like white circle on the floor in the middle of the room, and then a like identical white circle on the ceiling. And just like in the illustration that I made of that room. And then three of them like walked with me onto the center of the white circle that was on the floor. Again, this whole time, just, having that knowing, like, I'm just supposed to follow them. Where they walk, I walk. So I followed them into this, white circle at the center of this room at the end of the hallway. And just like the experience started, the light began to glow from both circles, the one on the ceiling and on the floor. And again, just like before, it got brighter and brighter until I couldn't see anymore. And then when the light faded, there I was in my backyard. And then the three beings who came back down with me walked me from the grass of the backyard back onto the patio, and then I, by myself, walked back into my house through the glass patio door that was still open. And then, and as I was walking down the halls, I started getting increasingly tired as I walked down the hall and then went back into my room and got back into bed, there was a small part of me in the background of my mind that was like, what was all that? But it was almost like sleep just swallowed me up whole. And that was the first experience. And that exact thing happened about a year later, again, when I was 9. Same exact experience, front to back. And then happened again when I was 10. It happened twice more when I was 10. And in between these sort of medical examination type of experiences, or whatever you want to call it, I have a lot of fragmentary memories of being on that craft, of walking down that curved hallway, of being led to other rooms on the craft, that like there was this other room they would lead me into where the floor was made out of the same sort of white spongy material, but the walls were lime green. And I would be led to a table, and then one of the beings would sit across from me. And sometimes there would be like these, like just very simple, like blocks that were like red, green, and blue, or red, green, blue, and yellow. And they would say to me, use these blocks as you see fit. But then other times there was just one like white cube at the center of the table, and they would ask me to try to move the cube without touching it, because it was a special cube, and that if I thought hard enough, like the cube would hear me, whatever that means. I don't recall ever being able to move the cube. Most of all of those memories of being in the room with the cube, most of them sort of just cut to black after a few tries of trying to move the cube. So all of that was happening between the ages of 8 to 10. And then the last experience that I had, that from what I recall was the last one. I don't currently remember them ever coming again after the age of 10. The last experience was when I waited for a little while before I shared it, just because I don't remember being taken. I remember being put back at the end of this experience, but I don't actually remember the part where I was taken for whatever reason. The memory just kind of, the way I remember it is I suddenly found myself walking down the curved hallway, following them. And by then I was kind of used to what was going on. So I'm like, okay, so here I am. So I'm supposed to follow them. And again, with whatever, mental manipulation or whatever you want to call it, they were working on me. I really didn't have, it did not feel like I had much of a choice. The idea of disobeying didn't even occur to me. So, I followed them down the hallway, and I was led into the room with the lime green walls, and there was the table with the white cube in the center of it. And by this point, I was 10, and this had been happening to me for a while. And in between these experiences, I just kept wishing, I'm like, I want to know what the hell is going on. Like, what is happening to me? I like cursed myself a little bit, like, I didn't work up the nerve to talk, but this time I sat down, and I sat down at the table. There was the white cube, and he sat down in front of me, and I just sort of knew, I'm like, okay, this is going to be my only shot. If I'm gonna find out what the hell is going on here, speak now or forever hold my peace, basically, was what was going through my head. And so I asked a question, and what kind of just flew out of my mouth much louder than I intended it to was like, are you guys aliens? And for a second, he just kind of looked at me and like blinked, which was weird, because I had never seen them blink before, but it like blinked, those huge creepy eyes, and just stared at me for a minute. And he what he said to me was, I'm sure that's what we seem like to you. You know, you Earth humans are our ancient ancestors. We are from your future. And I and then I asked him, I believe, so like, why are you here? Why are you visiting us? And he said that he was there to study human biology at such a time before humanity began to integrate technology into their bodies. So, according to what he was saying, he was some future evolution of a human being who had come back in time, I guess, to like study human biology at such a time before humans began integrating technology into their bodies, which as a kid at the time, I was like, oh, okay, whatever that means. Nowadays, that stands out a little more in my head because of everything that's going on with Neuralink, the chip that Elon Musk wants everybody to put in their heads. So, you know, now I think about that and it's like, oh, that's what he meant. Okay. And then I, you know, asked him, is anybody else here visiting us? Because I wanted to know. I was one of those kids who was always asking like 8 million questions all the time and like very much annoyed most of the grown-ups around me because of it. And like in the moment, I just wanted to know the things I wanted to know. And when in response to that, he said that that there were others other than his group visiting, but that he didn't, that he and his group did not speak with them much, but they had, he said, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. He said there were others visiting us, some from like, basically what he said was, you know, some from the future like them, some local to our timeline, and that he and his group didn't interact with them much, but that he had heard rumors of deals being made with some of the other groups visiting between the United States government and the other beings for technology in exchange for free reign to experiment on humans in America. Which again, as a kid, I was like, what? All right. But again, now as an adult, you know, having researched this topic a lot, you know, that's sort of much more of a profound thing. And then the last question that I asked him that just popped right out of my mouth was, do you like pizza? Because I really don't know why I asked that. I was just curious. I was a picky eater as a kid. At the time, I know that pizza was like the only thing I was eating. So I guess I don't know, maybe I was hungry. I don't know why I asked that question, but I asked that question and he said, no, your food would be toxic for us. And then he very abruptly, like, hard turned into, okay, so now let's try to move the cube without touching it. And the feeling very much was like, okay, enough questions. Let's get down to business. And I stopped asking questions. I tried to move the cube. I couldn't move the cube. And after, you know, a lot of tries to move the cube and I couldn't, they led me out of the room and back down to the hallway and then you know, they put me back like how they always had. They sent me, you know, walk down the hallway, went into the room with the white circles. But the only thing that was different this time was that none of them came with me onto the white circle. I stepped onto there alone. And then the light began to shine very brightly, and then the light faded, and there I was in our backyard. And I just kind of stood there for a second, because usually a few of them would have come back with me, but this time they didn't. And I don't know if it was because I was alone or because I was worried that I asked questions, but I got a very overwhelming feeling that, like, and that's it. They're not going to be back. And they, insofar as I can remember presently anyway, they never did come back after that. And that was the last of it.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. Holy smokes. I just, thinking about how young you were, that this is starting in your life around like age 5 and then going till 10. Like, if I experienced that as an adult, I would be just in terror, and I try to think about like, I mean, one of the things that stood out that I know about your story is you weren't, and I know this too because I grew up we were born around the same time, the same year almost. I didn't see pictures of aliens. Like I had heard of aliens, but like that wasn't something that was like really introduced to me until I was a little bit older. Could you
Mm-hmm.
talk about that for a little bit? Like what did you like, what was going through your child mind of like what this could be? I know you had asked them at 10 if they were aliens, but like what was that like for you trying to figure this out? And like when did you start learning about what this was?
I yes, I'm glad you asked me about that. I had, before these experiences, I had never been exposed to like the image of a, typical gray alien. Of course, now that image is everywhere. And even back then, I'm sure the image was around, but it wasn't something that I was like exposed to, the depiction of aliens with the big black eyes and the thin bodies and the big heads. That wasn't an image I became exposed to until I started doing my own research when I was around 10, after the experiences stopped, and when I just really had the strongest feeling like, okay, they're never going to come back. So, like, for whatever reason, like, it wasn't until then, and I've never really thought about this before, but it never felt safe for some reason to research what they were until I knew they weren't going to come back for whatever reason. I have no idea why that is, but that, because I was always at the library as a kid. Like I said, I was one of those kids who always had questions, and my parents would just take me to the library, and I would just walk around and look through the card catalog, which is it's almost ancient nowadays, but it just, for whatever reason, it didn't feel safe. It didn't. Yeah, it's weird. I hadn't really thought about that. It didn't feel safe to start researching any of this stuff until I knew, like, okay, they're not coming back. So, like, what the hell was that? Like, what was going on? It wasn't until I started seeking out books from the library about UFOs and aliens. That's when I saw that image for the first time. And the very first time I saw that image was on a book by Whitley Strieber, who is a famous abductee. He wrote a book called Communion, where he talks about his experiences. And right there on the cover is a picture of a gray alien. I remember I looked up the book in the card catalog. I went to the section where the book was, and I took the book out, and I almost dropped it on the floor because I was so surprised. I'm like, oh my God, that's them. That's them. Like, huh? Okay. So what? So this wasn't something. The image of a gray alien wasn't something that was in my mental lexicon of things. I had never seen it before. So, I know a lot of people are tempted to say, like, oh, well, maybe you were just dreaming it up. I'm sure you had seen it before. Like, I had never seen anything like those creatures before, and had no idea that anyone else had until after the experiences were over and I saw Whitley Strieber's book at the library at Communion.
I can only imagine how like validating that would have been, but how shocking that would be to like see that that's something that you saw and didn't have an explanation for was like published by somebody else and you were just looking at it again, but not in the flesh, like in a visual depiction, like what you showed us, a graphic. That had to have been just such a surreal experience for you.
It really was. It like I said, I almost dropped the book. I was so surprised when I pulled it off the shelf and saw the picture of the gray alien. It was wild. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So how did that impact you? Was that something that after you saw that, did you repel it away and sort of compartmentalize it and not think about it? Did you get a real like an obsession or fascination with learning about it? How did that impact you, like once you had sort of the the grammar for what happened to you, the descriptions? How did that impact you and like how did you navigate that?
I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think anyone would believe me. It wasn't quite like with the red room where I felt like I'm not supposed to talk about the red room, whatever that means. With these experiences, it was like no one is going to believe me. My parents are going to think I'm nuts. My dad, which, and this isn't an affront to my father at all, but he's just very much a nuts and bolts, it's only real if I can see it type of guy. And he's the one who raised me. And I'm like, my dad's gonna be like, you were just dreaming. But I knew it was real, but I had no idea what to do with that. And as a result, for a little while, between the ages of 10 and till I was maybe 14 or so, I did get pretty heavily into researching the topic of aliens and UFOs and abduction stories. And Whitley Strieber, I found out, who had that very first book I found, he's written a number of books on the topic. Even at that point, he had like 3 or 4 books out. I basically just tried to absorb as much knowledge as I could just so I could try to figure out what was going on, which of course, as a lot of people who research into the UFO UAP topic will tell you, the more you learn, the more questions arise. And other than that, thinking about it made me feel really scared. It made me feel really small, and I just had no idea, like, again, like, okay, that happened, now what? Like, what do I even do with all that? And so until very recently, what I did with it was just didn't talk about it, pretended like it didn't happen, tried my best to just move on with my life in whatever way, shape, or form I could. And sometimes I would start thinking about this topic again, and then I would start researching again, and then UFO research, UAP research, after a while, it kind of just turns into one big circle where you're left with more questions than answers. And I would get frustrated, and I would, step away from the topic for a while, and as a result, I definitely came away with a lot of knowledge about the UFO UAP topic, but I can't honestly say I have any more answers really than I did back then.
One of the things I thought was interesting about your story that I'd love for you to talk a little bit more on too, because I think this is just kind of an interesting detail. You mentioned your parents, being a little more black and white with their thinking, a little more how you said your dad was like a nuts and bolts person.
Mhm.
Um, Talk about, you know, your dad's habits with like locking doors and stuff, and like how sort of interesting that was that things seem to be off a little bit during these experiences that you had.
Yeah, my dad my dad was very he had his routine. He had this every morning, every night. He would walk around the house and check all the locks like at least 4 or 5 times. And he would walk up to the glass patio doors. He would make sure it was shut. He would lock the little, locking mechanism that was on there, and then have this big like wooden pole that he would put in to, wedge the door extra closed. And then he would pull on it a few times, and then he would walk around the house and check the locks again, and then pull on the glass patio doors. So like, and he was very, very like that door had to be closed. Like if like me or my brother were outside and then walked back inside and we left the patio door open, it didn't seem to matter where he was in the house. He somehow just seemed to know that someone had left that door open, and he would be like, hey, patio door, like, oh, sorry. So like just seeing that the patio door was already open when they walked me out, and then seeing that it was still open when they, when they put me back, and then seeing it still open, it was, it, I guess it almost kind of helped me in a weird way, because it was like, what? That's weird. Like, there is like, how is this door still open? Like, my dad could be like in the basement and yet somehow he hears the patio door open. But like, this door, so what, it's just been open this whole time? He had no idea. Like, it was weird. It was just really weird.
I find that fascinating because, like I said, a lot of times when these traumatic events happen in a lot of these whistleblower stories, like the parents aren't careful to like protect the kid. And so it wouldn't be weird if like a stranger came in the house, or, if there was something unusual happening because it was just so common. Where in your family, seems like there were a lot of precautions to protect you guys, and to make sure that your home was protected. And the interesting thing about your story, I mean, there's so much, but like I live in Missouri too. Like where this happened in Chesterfield is, 25 minutes away from me. And it's like, oh my gosh, and that's like a really, really nice area. There's a lot of when I go through there, like it's a really cool place. There's a lot of, families there. There's a lot of money there. There's a lot to do. There's a lot of good food. Like it's not a place that you would expect something like this to happen, and it's, I don't know how it was back then, probably a little bit different, but I mean, there's a lot of people there too. This isn't just like you're in the middle of nowhere, like out in the woods. Like you have neighbors, it's your relatively
Yeah.
close, and it's like an interesting sort of, place to think about this happening. As
Hmm.
far as the craft, like how big was it? Was it kind of small and like fit over your yard? Did it extend over to the neighbor's yard? What was the size of it that you can remember?
It's, I've never been the best at like size estimations, but it took up, it it pretty much like filled, like it was like about as big around as my backyard was. Like it filled the sky over my backyard, but it was low, maybe 50 to 70 feet across, but I honestly, it would be hard for me to say.
Did it make any sound, or was there anything? No, it just had these
Mm-mm.
lights in it.
It was completely silent. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And what about as far as time goes? I've heard different stories, and I know you were young, so I try to think like, gosh, I wasn't paying attention to the clock whenever I was younger, but was it like, was there a lot of missing time? So say for instance, if you were on the ship for 8 hours, was it like 8 hours that you were out of bed, or would it be like the same time whenever you came back home and it was like you didn't leave? Was there like a time distortion between being with them and then being back in your bed and like in present time?
Time had definitely passed, especially that last time. I I was always mostly lucid-ish when they put me back, but that last time, that's never something I haven't thought about that in a while. But I did look at the clock that last time, when I asked the questions and they put me back by myself, and I walked back into the house and very, very quietly closed the door, because I was like, I would just, how the hell am I going to explain how I was in the backyard? I better not wake dad up. Which, and I did look at the clock. The other times I had mostly just fallen right back asleep, because that weird otherworldly tiredness just seems to swallow me. But um I did look at the clock this time, and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, which struck me as odd, because like my bedtime back then, even at 10, like my parents, like my bedtime was like 9 o'clock when I was that age. And it wasn't long, although I didn't remember when specifically they took me. Historically, the experience, like it wasn't like 10, 15, 20 minutes after laying down in bed is when they would come to take me. but the experience itself didn't seem to take like hours and hours, but it was like 2 or 3 in the morning on the clock, at least that last time at age 10. So time seemed, from the best I can tell, to pass normally, like in the world while this was going on. But I cannot, even in these experiences where I remember for, I guess I can't always account for all of the time that seems to have passed while the event was occurring.
Wow. And after these events, when you were back in bed, would the craft have already gone, or would they wait for you to get in bed? And then what was the exit like? Did it disappear? Did it go really fast? Did it kind of go slow? Like, what did that look like after you had kind of been in that daze and got out?
It would it would go upwards and away so fast, very nearly looked like it was just disappearing. It was just like bloop, gone. Like it didn't like go up and out. It just like it went up so fast, like just up so fast that it almost looked like it had disappeared, is how it would. And that was usually like right when I would start like walking back inside, it would just be like bloop, gone.
Like a shooting star almost, just you see it
Mhm.
really quick, but it's not super visible. Oh my gosh, that's wild. Have you seen any reports ever of anything else in Chesterfield or even just in surrounding areas of people experiencing or seeing anything similar to what you did?
I haven't, and I've actually looked. I've looked like through like MUFON databases to try to see if someone else saw a craft that looked like a MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, which is like a just a group that like studies UFOs and investigates sightings and all that. And they have archives going way, way, way back. And I remember trying to look at the archives, but I've never been able to find anything in the area or like a UFO sighting that matched up with anything I've seen until just recently when some videos have come out, like for the first time with crafts with green lights. But when I was a kid at the time, I never saw anything. Never could find anything to to substantiate that. I never could find anything like that.
Oh my goodness. And now for people who, like I said, are this audience might be a little bit newer to this, like me. You had mentioned specifically kind of like a tall and a short gray alien. Would you be able to explain, and maybe there's more than what you know or might have been discovered, but what are the different types of um, non-human intelligence slash aliens that people have reported along those same lines that like tall gray, short gray type thing? Are there more that people have seen, more types?
Yes, the gray is the most commonly reported type, but there are a bunch of different types. The most commonly reported ones are the short grays, there are the tall grays. There are some encounters where people recall seeing short grays and tall grays, but the tall grays seems to be like in charge. Me personally, I never saw. I There was the red room with the tall one, and then the craft with the short ones. I never saw them together, but some experiencers over the years have reported seeing like short grays buzzing around as sort of worker drones, and then the taller grays who seemed to be like in charge. There are like praying mantis type beings that some people have reported that are commonly, sort of just called like mantids in most of like the lore and literature and whatnot. Then basically they just look like giant, like 6 to 7 foot tall, like praying mantis beings. And I never seen anything like that from what I'm currently able to recall it. And I'm glad, because that sounds super terrifying. Like the idea of seeing something like that, like, ugh. Yeah, with like complete with like the pincers and everything. That's a type. There are the reptilian type aliens, which basically just most people basically just describe them as, like just really tall, like lizard people. I don't know how else to say it, like lizard people, like, you know, just like humanoid in shape, but usually really tall and with like scales and like a lizard face and stuff. And sometimes they're reported to be like there are some experiencers, abductees, whatever, you know, whatever nomenclature you want to use, who report seeing small grays around with like reptilian beings being in charge. Again, I never saw, insofar as I can currently remember anyway, I never saw like a reptilian or anything. But that's another you know, being type that is reported, and those tend to be like the most commonly talked about ones. There are some reports of beings with larger heads but eyes more like ours with blue skin. There was a UFO sighting back in the 70s. I think there's some Netflix documentary on it. I forget. I'm completely blanking out, but this was an encounter where there was just these two dudes who were fishing, and then they purported to have seen this robot looking thing that they said had like lobster claws. So there are a number, there are all sorts of different types of things that people have allegedly seen, but the tall grays, the short grays, the mantids, the reptilians, and then there are also like more humanoid beings that have been described before that a lot of people call like Nordics, just because they're basically really tall, blonde, like pretty looking people who could easily pass for human, but who just like have some otherworldly quality about them. There are a race of beings who are kind of like the Nordics, that people refer to as the tall whites, that are tall. They look more like us humanoids, but their skin is white. Their hair is either white or blonde. And the tall whites are one of the races that some people actually say work out on some of the, you know, like secret desert military base areas. So, yeah.
And based off your research, so there's all these different types of aliens. What are some speculations as to what aliens or non-human intelligence are, and kind of where does your belief system lean? For example, do you believe that, or do you, I should say one option of what I would say the mainstream is aliens in NHI are always from a different planet and they're coming here. But that's not the belief system that everybody has. Would you be able to explain sort of some speculations as to what these creatures are? And I've also heard aliens are demons, you know, and that they're not actually. So there's like different things, but what are some things that you have heard, and where do you lean on that?
Well, there are, of course, within, you know, the UFO UAP community, there are a lot of different, you know, camps of thought, I guess, you know, you could say. Some people say, you know, they're all from other planets, or other people say, no, they're all, you know, secretly from underground, or they're all from another dimension, or they're all demons and they're evil. My, I have no idea what they are, where they're from, but my, I have a I think it's probably a combination of all of the above. I know the beings who took me said they were humans from the future. I don't know if I believe that. I mean, that's what he told me, but I have no idea if what he said was true, or if he was just giving me a cover story to shut me up, or so that when I was a grown up, I wouldn't like, you know, go looking in the wrong places or the right places, I guess. You know, some people believe they're from the future. Some people believe they're aliens. Some people believe they're like interdimensional. Some people believe they're from, like, in the case of reptilians, a lot of people say that they're from like hollow pockets of the earth, and that they're like another intelligent race that evolved here. there's pretty much every explanation that you could think of. There's, camps of people who say that that's where they're from. Myself, I'm inclined to believe, like I said, that it's probably a combination of all of the above. It based on, again, I have no reason to believe or disbelieve the information the being gave me, but he did say that there were multiple groups who were here, and that makes sense to me. That, like, I've never quite understood why so many people try to pigeonhole things into just being this or just being that. All of my research and everything I've looked into points to all of the above. Multiple different beings from multiple different places here to do any number of things.
Great answer. That's sort of, like I said, I'm a little bit newer to this, but just hearing, and knowing the little bit that I do, I've thought that too when somebody's like really staunch on, no, it's 100% a demon, or it's 100% out of, the galaxy somewhere else that's not from planet Earth, and it's like, why couldn't it be both? Or like, why couldn't it be something otherworldly, but have like a demonic entity like attached to it? I think that there could be any combination of these things that we can speculate, and like that we are better off keeping an open mind to it than like keeping a belief system that's so limited, because there are so many different variations of how these stories are told. And the more divided we are, the harder it's gonna be to get to the bottom of this. And I wanted to sort of ask you the same question about these craft. What are some of the speculations of what these craft could be, and where do you lean on that, as far as are the craft, from the future? Is it from a different planet? Is it from here on Earth and it's just, suppressed technology? What are some of the speculations, and like kind of where do you lean on that too, or what are your thoughts?
My thoughts, of course, one of them told me they were from the future, but like I said, I don't know if I believe that. I'm an adult now. I've done a lot of research into UFOs and UAPs, and I think back on my experiences, my memories, and try my best to step outside of myself and examine what happened to me as if it were something happening to another person. And every time I think of the whole, like, oh yes, we are human, we are from the future, the thought that keeps popping into my head is like, that fits into pre-existing UAP lore just a little bit too neatly. Like if this were something that I were hearing from someone else, I'm like, well, that fits pretty neatly into existing UFO lore. And of course, one explanation could be because, like, yeah, that's because the lore is true. But of course, one must look at all the possibilities. I feel like if you're going to look at this experience and try and pull data from it, like, but he also could have just been feeding me a line, to make sure that, for all we know, the government has put out tons and tons of misinformation about these sightings and these experiences. Who's to say the NHI governments aren't doing the exact same thing, putting out misinformation so that we don't know who they really are or where they're really from, which, I mean, that seems like a pretty logical thing to do to me, especially if you're coming here from somewhere else to a planet like Earth that is in a constant state of war. I mean, humans are violent, right? So it makes sense that a visiting species, even if they are here for peaceful intent, wouldn't necessarily want us to know a damn thing about what they really are or where they're really from. I think the research I've done over the years, again, seems to point to there being a variety of different origins. I think some of these craft are from other planets. I think some of these craft are being controlled by beings that are more interdimensional in nature, and that perhaps these crafts are just projections of things from higher dimensions, and what we see is just what, like, our tiny human minds are able to perceive. But I definitely think that, and there are at least a few of these crafts that are ours that are crafts built by, Lockheed Martin or Boeing or whoever, that were made using were like reverse engineered craft from technology that we got from crafts that had crashed. Because everything that I've looked into and researched and read has always just seemed to point to that, like, the government either, these things either crash or they're shot down, and the government scoops them up and, does some research on them. I don't think every single UFO is like reverse engineered government UFOs. ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, are like a lot of times what you'll hear like people like within the UAP community call it. I think some of them are ARVs. I think some of them are probably from other planets, and some sort of like the beings that are here. I think that there isn't just one explanation for what these crafts are. I think that there's probably a variety of different crafts coming from a variety of different places, and at least some of it, I'm I'm almost positive must be our own experimental tech that we got by reverse engineering crafts that the government procured in, whatever sketchy way the government procures them.
And that leads me to want to comment on again why this conversation in particular I feel needs to be talked about more. And I have had mentioned, and not in the same context as what we're talking about here, to where the person that I was interviewing directly said aliens or non-human intelligence or even UFOs. But there have been many instances on my podcast where people who have come out of these secret, not necessarily secret societies, but secret cults, secret families, a lot of these generational families, a lot of survivors as children were exposed to advanced technology as children. And there seems to be a commonality of people that say consistently that there are things that exist that are at least 50 years ahead of where we are right now, present, which is crazy to think about. Cause like you said,
Oh
like
yeah.
our brains, like we get a new iPhone and it's like, oh my gosh. And to think about like 50 years in the future of what's possible, that could exist now, like it's mind bending to even try to consider that. Right. But when
Mm-hmm.
I hear your story, it's really in line with a lot of the stuff that I've heard, that there is for sure hidden technologies.
Oh yeah.
Why wouldn't there be, right? Like, why would they tell us everything that they have, that's just not how this works, right? But I wanted your feedback on some of the crossovers that you see, some of the anomalies that you see, consistencies between abductees. What are some of the things that you've learned that might surprise people, and that could even relate to, say, MK Ultra or some of these, other aspects of survival and, overcoming things that other victims go through?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of crossover between, the survivor community, whether it's of MK Ultra programming or, whatever mind control type of thing, and the, UFO abductee experience community. There's a lot of crossover. What's interesting to me, especially, is, there are a lot of, like you said, reports of like high technology being involved in some of the programming and some of these programs in general. And it's like, okay, so if these UFO crash retrieval programs are real, let's say they're real, and it's being kept secret by the most powerful people in this country, the people whose names no one knows, the gatekeepers, so to speak, who's to say they're just going to use that technology that they reverse engineer to make, like fancier missiles or fancier airplanes? They're going to take this stuff and use it in whatever way, shape, or form they can. So it's, the link to me seems to, at least, so if UFO crash retrieval programs are real, and then some of this technology, like, and they're reverse engineering this stuff, there's also been reports of not just like, when we talk about reverse engineering, a lot of people talk about propulsion systems and craft and space travel, but there are also a lot of like I don't know if derivative is the right words, but like derivative technologies that have come that the UFO lore and literature seems to suggest, like a lot of the technology we have today, like like transistors and microchips and fiber optics, and I think even like Velcro. I think I even heard from somewhere like ultimately the source was reverse like technology from crash crafts that were seeded throughout industry and reverse engineered into the products we have today. But let's say you have some sort of healing technology that they find on these crafts. Well, I mean, the people who are really in control, they, how would they always say, they want to keep us sick and in debt and all that. But you know, miraculous healing technology, that also seems like a pretty good way to cover your tracks so that the people who you are abusing do not physically appear to be abused. You could, put someone through endless torture, chop a limb off, cut them open, do whatever you want to them, and then just, stick them in the chamber like healed, no evidence. Like I, it, I would be more surprised if stuff like that wasn't happening. You know what I'm saying?
100%. And one thing that I was thinking that came to my head as you were just saying that, there are survivors who have said that they went through actual alien programming. And I don't know exactly what that entails, but one thing I do know is that there seems to be a consistency too when a lot of survivors first break their programming or when it starts to degrade, that one of the first things that they come out saying is that they've seen aliens. It seems to be something too that a lot of people are programmed to say, to how we were saying earlier, further sensationalized, looking crazy and sort of like discrediting it, and almost mocking it in a way, and it's a really easy thing if somebody's just blurting that out, after they break their mind control. Um, that is a way that, somebody who might be close to that person could be like, that's insane. Like they're, you sound crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and so I look at all the ways too that like this could be used to not just manipulate the public, but be used to further discredit this movement, by taking actual people who have had experiences of some kind, whether it was technological and like VR, or if it was an actual physical abduction as what you experienced, all these different ways that they can sort of use this and put enough of it out to the public to where the public knows about what these words are, but doing it in a way to where like it never sounds real. And so then when somebody like you comes along, there's a lot of, resistance to people accepting this as being like a normal conversation that they're willing to have.
Yeah, definitely. There are plenty of stories out there of, you know, people, alleged insiders or experiencers or whoever who have said that a portion of alien abductions are actually performed by the military and that they're, some of them are complex, like created scenarios designed to look like an alien abduction, but that are really done for other purposes. Uh, I I don't think that all alien, I don't think that all, abduction experiences fall under that category, but I think it's plausible to say that at least some do.
100%. Yeah. And again, like the crossover, that's kind of what I see is that, I've heard, and I'm so thankful that your story didn't involve you, at least to the memories that you have, like being tortured and having, surgeries done on you. And like I've just heard, and I know you have probably a million times more than me, but I've heard abduction and abductee stories of people who have had experiences that involve just horrendous dismembering of their body, and then having to contend with that after it happens. And so you look and it's like, this is a survivor community. These are victims of perpetration happening outside of them that they have no control over. And you even look at your experience where, you had a normal reaction, such as terror, and then all of a sudden it was like a mind control program was playing where it
Mhm.
integrates and you're just in sort of trance, having
Yep.
your conscious mind be like, hey, what are you doing, bro? Like, why are you getting on this ship? But like, it's just,
Mhm.
they turn you into like a robot. So you see even crossover
Exactly.
in that way too, And so for me,
Mhm.
it's like we need to all come together and talk about this because I think that there's a lot of crossover between the communities and the fact that we're not looking at, somebody like you in the same way that we would look at your fiance. I think it's not doing a service to the progress that we could be making together. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about like, you're speaking out, right? What are some of the things, or I guess reasons why somebody wouldn't, or, what were some of the conflicts that you had in your head when you were debating whether or not to, because you stayed silent for a long time before you decided to speak out. But I think a lot of people take it to the grave, and I think we can have meaningful conversations that can help encourage that pattern to break and to help sort of normalize this to get people encouraged to talk about it. So I wanted to talk about some roadblocks with you, kind of some things that resistance, reasons why people wouldn't want to speak out, and sort of like what the battle is on your end when you're going on the battlefield every day and trying to fight, like what are you up against?
Well, for me, I stayed silent for so long because I did not think I did I didn't think anyone would believe me. I didn't know. I couldn't figure what help it would be. It seemed like at first that all I would stand to gain from talking about this experience would be ridicule. And so for a while I stayed silent, but what I really realized is, the whole like, well, what do I even do with this? What would I even say? It's like, well, what I'll say is what happened, and people will either believe me or they won't. You know, I'm not trying to, people, that's really all there is to it. People are either going to believe me or they're not. But it was the realization of how many other people that this was happening to who were feeling just as alone as I've always felt. And it's like, okay, so somebody needs to, like step out first. Like somebody needs to get this ball rolling. And of course, there are other, you know, amazing experiencers who have shared their experience. I don't mean to say that like I'm by any means the only one, but I knew that like, okay, more people need to start talking about this. This, you know, it the I really made it I really decided to come forward when after last year, last summer, I believe it was, when David Grush went public. He was a former intel officer who worked for the UAP task force, and he was basically, as an intel officer, tasked with like, hey, go figure out what the hell is going on with all this UFO crap. Go look into all that, Dave. And he looked into it, and then he went public with what he found. And what he claims he found was that yes, there is a crash retrieval program. Yes, the government does have crafts. Yes, there have been reverse engineered technology. Yes, there are bodies. Yes, to all of this stuff. And while it was very encouraging to see all of these things talked about and more normalized and less stigmatized, the abduction aspect of all of it still very much was completely off to the side and separate and just not really being talked about at all. And yet it's such a big part of the UAP conversation. And you know, David Grush went public, and one of the things he said in one of his, appearances was, like he came forward hoping that others would then feel emboldened to come forward. And it's like, okay, so, this kids are being like me and kids like me were taken from their homes at night and like terrorized, and weird medical type procedures were done on us, and no one ever knew. And it's happened to a lot of people, and this really needs to be something that there needs to be a conversation had about this. There needs to be an avenue for people to talk about these experiences, because if we're ever going to get to the bottom of any of this, it needs to start with honest conversations about every aspect of the phenomenon. The reverse engineering and, the secret government programs, that's great, but the abduction phenomenon is a part of it too, and needs to be a part of the conversation. And I realized that I was like, okay, so I have direct firsthand experience with this crap, so I really need to, I just felt called, I guess, to come forward and just talk about what happened to me, in the hopes that maybe the other people in my generation who have also had experiences like this would feel a little safer to come forward too. Like, let me say the crazy thing first, so to speak.
And that's why I think you're a hero. It takes a lot of courage to do that. Like a lot of people, like to wait until something's kind of already a movement before they jump on board. There's a little TED talk, it's like 2.5 minutes, that I think about often whenever I am speaking to you or another guest on my show. You guys are all pioneers that did volunteer to be like, okay, if nobody else is gonna do this, like I'm going to, like I don't want to, it's the last thing that I want to do ever, is like rehash this and talk about it again, but somebody's got to do it. And so why not me, And this little TED talk, it's called like How to Start a Movement. And it shows like this big grassy area and all these people sitting down, like having, they're at like a festival or something. And one person gets up and like is just like dancing like crazy. And everybody's looking at him. And you see people pointing, like, what's this guy doing? Well, like eventually, like 30 seconds in, another person gets up and starts dancing with them all crazy.
Mhm.
And then by the time you know it, by the end of like the 2.5 minutes, everybody gets up because more and more people start joining, and all of a sudden like that one person that stood up looked crazy at first, but eventually it got to the point where if you're sitting down you looked crazy, so everybody got up and like at the end everybody was dancing. And I was like, gosh, that's so powerful to think about. Like that's such a cool responsibility in a way to have. Like it's an honor to hold that responsibility, but I can see how it would be really scary, especially because the way that this topic in particular has gotten so sensationalized and almost like discredited, to where I think most people on some level absolutely believe that there's something else out there, that we're not alone. But that tends to be like as far as people will go. They're not willing to be like, well, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's stuff here, that we have entities here on Earth? Does that mean that, there's like imminent danger of our world being the boundaries between us and space are broken, and there's things that are like coming in and out, and it's like I think that we really do need to talk about this, not just because, there's a correlation, obviously, like how we were saying, between a lot of different areas that this topic touches, but just because, if they're think about I try to think about, you as a kid being told that, hey, we are experimenting on humans because your government gave us permission to, and we want to essentially get to know the human body before it interfaces with technology. Like imagine what they're doing now to kids if like that was the goal then, because what they were experimenting on you then is happening now. And so it's like, what does 20 years from now look like that they're doing on kids? Like it's really scary to think about that.
Exactly, like, because this was happening to me in the 90s, right? Like, a long time ago. So like, what does the program look like now? What are they doing to kids now? Like, what's happening now? And like, it's quite unsettling to think about.
Absolutely. Do you remember any of the things that, or I shouldn't say, do you remember, did they ever communicate with you what they were testing you for? Did they ever tell you what like any of the metrics
Mhm.
were?
Nope, they sure didn't.
That is wild. And so as far as like, I think one of the things that you do well, like how I said, is you present this in a very down to earth way. You're able to, discuss it in a way that, I only had to listen to you for 10 seconds in the first interview that I heard where I'm like, he's not crazy. Like he sounds totally logical. Like he's absolutely sane. This is like a very bright, intelligent, eloquent person, but I think the initial reaction people have when they are confronted with this information is they just kind of want to push it away or like not listen. It's really easy to just be like, "Oh, you're lying," instead of like diving in. Like how can society embrace this? Like what do you see as being like a solution to that, or like what are ways that we can be better for you and for the community that, that you're speaking on behalf of?
I think that if more people just set aside whatever their personal beliefs or personal thoughts or whatever are and just listened. It's like, okay, you say you don't believe that this is happening, that's fine, but just like put that down for a minute and just listen. And even for someone who doesn't necessarily believe in all this stuff, if they were to just sit down and just listen, at least 7 times out of 10, that skeptical person is going to come away from a conversation at least a little bit less skeptical, at the very least believing that, okay, this person at least believes that this thing happened to them. Just if more people were to just put their own crap aside and just listen, you know, I think this conversation would probably end up going a lot farther.
Do you think too that sort of like MK Ultra, satanic ritual abuse, how we're discovering that this is like it's not uber common to where it's like the everyday person goes through it, but do you feel like more people than what we can imagine have gone through something like what you did?
I very, very strongly have that feeling. Part of it comes from the Red Room memories where there were at least like 25 to 30 other kids in that room with me. But it's just, I've always had a feeling very, very deep down in my bones that especially people of my generation, like that this isn't something like obviously, like everyone hasn't been like, taken, but I don't think that this experience is as uncommon as, you know, some people would think. I think I definitely think that this is something that has happened to a lot more people than anyone realizes. It's just been so stigmatized and ridiculed, with people losing their jobs and their families and their livelihoods after coming out as abductees or experiencers or whatever you want to, whatever you want to call it. It's people are scared into silence, but they can ridicule one of us, they can make fun of one of us, they can fire one of us, but like they can't fire all of us, they can't ridicule all of us. Like the more voices that we add to the choir, so to speak, the louder the song gets, or whatever you want to say.
100%. And I love that you have a very supportive partner, which I love, and I know that goes both ways on her part too. She just speaks the world of you. Um, that's not the case for a lot of people where they feel comfortable, talking to their partner about this or even a friend. Is there a way that you found to kind of break the ice that seems to work if you're trying to maybe share with somebody? And then on the other end, is there something that or things that that Kaity has done for you that has made you feel really safe to be able to talk about it, that other people can kind of, if they have a friend or a spouse that has gone through this, or if they're the spouse that went through it and they want to tell somebody, what types of things, how have you found works for you guys to navigate that?
It seems like a real simple thing, but the biggest thing of all that Kaity, my fiance, did for me was she just listened with an open mind and heart, and that went a very, very long way. If when it comes to telling your partner, or if you're someone whose partner has recently disclosed or whatever, just there is so much power in just being present and listening and just being there for someone to hear what they're saying. You know, I think as especially for like, you know, us dudes out there, I know like it's our instinct to just want to fix the thing and make the thing better, but it's like, no, there's not always a thing to fix. There's not always some, just listen, you know, just be there and just listen. You know, that's what Kaity did for me, and it was very powerful, you know, just her listening with an open mind and an open heart and just being there for me went a long way.
Have you found any, I guess, how do I want to word this? As far as your healing goes, have there been things that I know everybody's a little bit different? Is there anything that you can recommend to people who have experienced something like you have? Is there any good places that you would recommend somebody start to begin contending and healing from this?
Meditation is really the thing that helped me a lot, like a whole lot. It's only something I've really started doing seriously over the past few years, and it's actually something that Kaity turned me on to. And it's really just being able to, you know, go to a quiet mental place and just meditate. It really has helped me a lot. And I think everyone, you know, should try meditation. I think a lot of people would be a lot better off if they just sat and meditated for at least 15 minutes a day at some point. You
That
know,
is
it helped me really learn how to quiet my mind so I could get to a place where I could collect my thoughts and try to make sense of everything I remembered.
great answer. I totally agree with you. I think that that's a really, everybody should do it no matter what they went through. But I think especially for something like what you've experienced, that can be a really good way to just center yourself because that has to feel like so chaotic, kind of trying to contend with that. And then as far as for people who feel really alone, are there communities or where would you recommend people go if they have an experience, they don't know who to tell, and they're just feeling so alone? Are there communities and groups that people can look into that you would recommend?
Well, there are, you know, there aren't as many as there aren't as many as one would like to see. You know, I mean, I'm at Aaron Schultz Art on X, and you know, for anyone who may be watching this and who has, you know, an experience like mine, but who has no idea who to tell, like my just, you know, my DMs are open, or at least I think they're open. Just, you know, message me or just at me, you know, I'm, how much may I have to say? Who knows? But like, I'll at least, you know, listen. And there are a lot of, you know, social media can be a pretty dicey place sometimes. Of course, you're always going to run into, you know, rude, nasty people, but the, you know, hashtag UFO Twitter community on X, there's a large part of that community that's very accepting and very like a lot of people with their heads on straight when it comes to this sort of a thing, you know.
That's awesome. And thank you for offering your own platform and, direct messaging for people. And you're also on Instagram as well.
Yes, I don't Instagram is mainly, I'm a comic book artist, so Instagram is mainly just where I like post my comic art stuff. But I mean, I'm on there too, and of course, you know, anybody is always free to message me on there as well.
And I wanted you to talk about that just a little bit because I think that that's a really neat thing that you do. How did you get into to art and how have you're obviously using it to help your own storytelling, but kind of what's on the horizon for you, and what are you kind of working on right now?
Right now, well, I got into art when I was very, very, very little. I used to, have my mom draw me pictures of like superheroes and things. But eventually I just got frustrated because I wanted to learn to do it myself. So I just kind of did. I just sat down with a bunch of comic books or sometimes, I would like freeze frame VHS tapes of whatever like cartoon show I liked to watch, and I would just copy. So that's kind of how I started. And now what I'm working on a sort of uh, comic novel hybrid sort of a deal that doesn't have anything at all, to do with like my UFO stuff. It's just a story that I've been plotting out and writing for years and years and years. And that's presently what I'm working on in regards to comic art stuff.
Your art is awesome. Do you have like a store, or if people wanted to purchase or do commission work with you, is Twitter probably the best place to reach out to you for that?
Yes, like Twitter, just because like that's where I am these days the most, but Twitter or Instagram would be the best places to reach out to me, like for anyone who wants like commission work or anything. I have my email, I think, in my on both my Twitter and Instagram profiles. So yeah, that would Twitter or Instagram would be the places to reach me for anything like that.
And then I wanted to ask too, because I'm sure people are wondering, what has been the response since you have come out and spoken, and how has family, friends reacted, the internet? What has been your experience since coming out and speaking about this?
For the most part, people have been very kind and supportive on X, which I mean, of course, there's always going to be, a dickhead here or there who's like, oh, whatever, bro, cool story, bro. But like, that's that's few and far between. Personally, I don't really pay much attention to any of that. But for the most part, people have been very kind and supportive, and it was very pleasantly surprising. Uh, my I have not, in regards to like friends or family, my family, I haven't like face to face directly told any of them. Uh, my dad, I know, is on Twitter, and I know he reads my Twitter because sometimes he'll be like, oh, so did you say blah 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 on Twitter today? But he has not. If he has read my posts about my experiences, he hasn't said anything about them. So I don't know if he knows. Like, it's not necessarily that I'm like trying to hide it from him. It's just like I'm just gonna let that one play out by itself and see how it goes, because my dad, he's a very grounded sort of dude, and you know, I don't really know. I don't know how he would take that. But uh the in regards to like people on X and just the internet in general, everyone for the most part has been very kind and have been very thoughtful in the comments they've made and all that. So it's not as it's definitely scary, but it's not quite the waters aren't quite as shark infested as one might think, or at least they haven't been for me thus far.
That's awesome news, because I know that that's a big reason why people don't speak out, because they're afraid of the opposite, that they're going to be met with opposition and bullies, and that's really refreshing to hear that like this day and age you're actually being met with a lot more support than you are opposition. So
Mhm.
hopefully that can give people courage on the other side. And I really appreciate you speaking out on this again. Like, this is a tough topic. It is more taboo than some of the other abuse topics that are, kind of circulating. And it's a harder one, I think, for people to wrap their minds around, and just know kind of what to do with that information. It's very daunting. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about today that you wanted to add, that you wanted to make sure that you talked about, or anything that you wanted to say to people?
Not really. I believe I covered everything. I guess if I were to give any sort of final word, it would just be like listen to experiencers. Like a lot of the UFO Twitter community and just people interested in the topic in general are very focused on like government disclosure, get the info what the government knows. But like we, they're they'd have to be dragged kicking and screaming to like reveal any secrets, right? We can't wait for the government, because if it was up to the government, they wouldn't tell us jack shit, you know. But us experiencers, we haven't signed any NDAs. We don't have like top secret clearances we're worried about keeping. Like we're just people, right? So like listen to experiencers, right? And as for like fellow experiencers, let's just start talking about this stuff. Like nobody's going to do it for us. So may as well be us.
Amen to that. Yes. I know the more that we can come together and stop, kind of like these petty little inner wars, like you were saying, there's different like groups of experiencers, like they segment off instead of all coming together. I think
Mm-hmm.
so powerful if we all put all this information together and kind of look at it. I think that we could get really far by, comparing and contrasting and keeping an open mind to everything instead of just kind of having this very narrow-minded thought patterning of I have to only pick one thing that I can believe of this, and everything else can't matter, and I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that about you, that you come into this with a very open mind, and the ability to change your beliefs if needed, to add things to it, and to just be a voice and to listen to people. Like you said, like nobody's better at doing that in this particular movement than you. You're always so open-minded to like hearing things and not writing it off as being fake, or bullying people, and saying, no, that's not what my experience was, so yours isn't, your experience
Mm-hmm.
is true. Like I love how open you are, and you're so inviting for people to, have just an open discussion about this. So I thank you, Erin, for your work and for everything that you're doing, and for coming on here and sharing. I know that this is it's not easy to talk about this stuff. It can be really traumatizing and energetically draining. So I just want to honor you for your courage to speak up online, to start doing podcasts and stuff like that, and just for being a voice for the voiceless.
Well, thank you again so much for having me on and giving me a platform.
Absolutely. You're welcome on anytime. And it would be fun to have you on again. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions from people since it is kind of newer. So if you guys are listening and have questions, I encourage you guys, if you want to do it privately, go ahead and DM Aaron. I'll link his Twitter and his Instagram in the show notes. They light up as hyperlinks, so just go ahead and click. It'll take you right to his profile. And he offered his private messaging for anybody to just reach out. So go ahead and DM him. And then in the comment section, if you guys have questions or want to create conversation, we encourage that. The more that we can do that publicly, and we can just discuss and get people together to kind of put all of our pieces of the puzzle together, the better it is. So leave your questions below. If there's something we didn't talk about that you guys want us to cover, we can do another episode, or have Aaron publish something on his social media about it to answer your question. We would love to help, guide you guys through learning more and catering the conversation to things that maybe you guys are confused about or have questions about. Again, we want to open dialogue, so feel free to leave your comments in the comment box below, no matter what platform you're on to, and interact with us, and go through the comment section, see what other people are leaving, and leave comments. Let's start building a community and collaborating on this. And again, go support Aaron either way, even if you don't reach out to him. One of the best ways that we can sort of offer protection to whistleblowers is to support them. And a follow means the world. Our platforms don't get elevated easily on social media, and they're very suppressed. And that gives the enemy ammo to be like, well, nobody cares about this person, we can do whatever we want. So if we build up the followings of people like Aaron and Kaity and others coming forward, it gives the enemy a run for their money and makes them think twice about, you know, trying anything that could interfere with their whistleblowing. So I encourage you guys to go support Aaron in his mission. Go connect with him over his work, get a commission piece from him. It's always awesome to directly support survivors and support their businesses. So I encourage you guys to go connect with him. I'll have all my notes in the show notes, you guys, as well. I appreciate you guys hanging out and listening week after week, day after day, supporting these amazing guests and warriors like Aaron who come forth and, you know, pioneer speaking out, and just honored to have you guys here. So you guys, thank you so much for listening. God bless you, and we will see you next time.